paper that Vipin mentioned as well. So thank you. Do others on the call have working groups that they attend that they'd like to report on specifically? All right.
Yeah, recording's bouncing on it. I see Sam's on. So apart from the trust spanning protocol, there's the trust task force as well, which is all about profiles and so we need the protocol to get from trust service to trust service. But what profiles should those trust services have? So that's another one that's pretty active. That's getting stuff done. So I think that's important. And then I don't see Matthew on here setting up the credential exchange formats. So that's out there. We have there will be a blog post in the next couple of weeks. We have some level of maturity, but we want to get that out so that others could chime in on credential exchanges that they're familiar with and add them or update what's out there. So that blog post should be coming from Trust Over IP soon.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks for that update.
Last time's call was also on a connected topic. So this whole interoperability movement is very much alive. And obviously today's call is also somewhat related to that.
Absolutely. Any other working group status updates or announcements that anybody would like to give before we jump into the presentation? All right. I think I will turn it over to you, Tram, for your presentation. Feel free to introduce yourself and screen share. We're very glad that you are joining us today.
Thank you. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Real quick. My name is Trambo. I'm CEO and founder of Mobi. And thanks for having me here today. I'm just going to go off camera because my bandwidth is a little slow this morning. We depend too much on technology. Speaking of technology, full disclaimer, I am not a technologist. My background is actually in chemistry, and then I went on to art conservation. I work for many cultural heritage organizations around the world, such as UNESCO and the Getty Trust in Los Angeles. Did many cultural preservation projects in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, South America, and Asia. And for a while there, when I was traveling a lot to those destinations, my friends will jokingly say that I must work for the CIA instead of cultural heritage. In 2018, along with my co-founder, Chris Ballinger, we launched Mobi, a smart Mobi consortium. During the presentation today, it's very casual. So if you have questions, go ahead and ask during the presentation. Don't wait until the end. So let me proceed here. A brief history about Mobi and why we are working on cross-industry interoperability and business automation. I'll use the two terms interchangeably, interoperability and business automation. So although we launched in 2018, Most of our history went back to 16 and 17. Many of the now Mobi members were very excited about blockchain and experimented with many proof of concepts. And they all found out that putting a vehicle data service onto a chain, that was the easy part. Technology was not a problem, but these applications weren't able to scale. And that was due to, I think, 3 main reasons. One, the industry needs standards on how to identify vehicle, people, things, trips. When does a trip begin? When does it end? And how do you connect the trip from the beginning to the end? And how do you settle transactions? All those needs standards. 2, the companies were using decentralized Web3 technology, but they were building centralized Web2 platforms and were not able to convince others to go onto them. For example, one of the automakers spent a lot of money building a mass multimodal platform and couldn't get other automakers to go onto them. Another one built a supply chain platform, but couldn't convince others to go onto it since it's behind a firewall. A third one I talked to, it's a logistic company, and a huge one based in Europe, spent many millions building a logistic platform. Again, couldn't convince other logistic platforms to go onto it. So there were numerous examples, not just in mobility, in other industries as well, telecoms and all that. What we learned is that centralized platforms for enterprise solutions don't scale. What we've learned in the past couple decades is that we don't want to put our business onto someone else's platform. That means we lose our data and we lose our control over them, and we can't monetize them in the way that we would like them to do. And the third reason is that although most anything can be put onto a blockchain, however, most things like customer PII and business sensitive business information should not be put onto a chain. How blockchain is used is critical. We think, well, for example, every culture has a chicken and rice recipes, right? If you Google it, there's hundreds of different ways of cooking chicken and rice. It's how you cook it is what matters. So at Mobi, we use blockchain only for decentralized identifiers or DID registry. So along with our members, we are creating the standard for interoperability, business automation, and we're building the community-owned and operated Web3 infrastructure to do all these interoperability and communication with. So why is cross-industry interoperability important? Most of the productivity gained in the last 50 years came from business automation of internal processes, and that was just digitization. So very little was from automation of extended value chains involving unrelated or untrusted parties. Even for those, they tend to be with a couple or a very small group of organizations using centralized platforms. And therefore they're not scalable to industry-wide, much less cross-industry. Across the connected ecosystem, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of service providers and governmental agencies. They all have their unique databases, their processes and their regulations on how to handle business and customer data. And some of these organizations are billion-dollar organizations, billion-dollar companies, and some of them are small mom and pop that operations that provide services like Smart Jack, for example, or making the nuts and bolts for the operation. So to automate these extended value chains across all the different industry, we need solutions that are affordable, that has low barrier to entry for everyone. And of course, we need verifiable identity. I don't need to tell this working group that, and claims that are recognized and accepted by all industries. At Mobi, we are currently working with telecoms, insurance, grid providers, and semiconductors consortia as well. And we continue to talk to other industry, open to talk to any industry that you could think of. Would love the introduction. And the big picture from the beginning has been the same for us until now, is that the convergence of the technologies you see here on the screen will permit any entity, a person, a vehicle, a device, or a piece of infrastructure to have a trusted identity that can directly communicate and securely transact with another connected entity. And in doing so, not having to go through someone else's centralized platform. And trusted identity, once you have that, and you link it with location into a verifiable trip, that will enable a pay-per-use economy that we call the new economy of movement. I don't think we need to talk about why this is important. I think everybody on this call agree that trusted identity is important. And I think everybody have seen this cartoon. It was published on July 5th of 1993, which is pretty insightful considering that same year, a few months before that same year, April 30th of 1993 was the first time the World Wide Web was made available to the general public. So just a few months later, and I think we all have seen this cartoon. So I can skip that slide. For cross-industry interoperability to happen, the solution needs the 5 things that are listed here. We need zero trust authentication. So that means every entity must be identified and authenticated for every transaction. And all data and credentials and claims must be verifiable. Data privacy, of course, for regulatory compliant, and the ability to limit access to intended recipient only, data security and selectively disclose. We want to push the data to the edge. We don't want to have to open up the databases to do transaction. We want to push the data out and do edge transaction, and the ability to selectively disclose and verify information at the moment of transaction only. So not having to store data before, during, or after each transaction is extremely important for us as well. Don't want to be a honeypot for any cybersecurity risk. We want the solution to be affordable, interoperable, scalable, and extensible. So that means the solution has to be standards-based and platform agnostic that works with any legacy system, so that there's no costly new infrastructure requirement, especially for the small businesses that is in the ecosystem. And decentralization here, I'm not talking about the technology. I'm talking about not wanting centralized platforms owned by one company. We want the infrastructure to be community owned and operated. And to address all the requirements that were listed in the previous page, we've been working on the solution which we call the self-sovereign digital twins, or SSDTs. The concept of digital twins was introduced by NASA back in the 60s. So a digital twins is a digital representation of a system or an object that capture static and near real-time data throughout its lifetime. So for us, the self-sovereign digital twins is a digital twin that can self-generate verifiable credentials. They are universal translators, encrypted locked data vaults, and only accessible by the owner or the controller of the SSDT. And they have the ability to authenticate identity and selectively disclose pertinent information as verifiable credentials for transactions at the edge. So again, instead of opening up centralized databases, data is pushed to the edge for transaction, and we are using DIDS and VC standards. So therefore, our ecosystem can use the internet for transaction and existing infrastructure instead of building new infrastructure. So if you look at the requirements from the previous page, the self-sovereign digital twins, SSDTs fulfill pretty much all of them. They use zero trust authentication. They enable data privacy and security. They are standards based so that everybody know how to communicate with each other. And they are affordable because the user don't have to build a new infrastructure. SSDTs can be a web app or an app that you can download onto your device of choice. And the last thing we need to address is how not to create centralized platform. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I'm having trouble understanding a self-sovereign digital twin if it's a natural person. So you're saying as a natural person, I could have a self-sovereign digital twin. How do I that has the same authenticity, the same verifiable credential? How do I prove that I am, as a natural person, a digital twin of myself? How does that digital twin authenticate? How do they prove that it is who they say they are?
So
in other words, how do you do identity binding with a digital twin of an identity when it's a natural person?
Okay, so the natural person, we would of course relies on the government issues credentials. And then right now we are working with motor vehicle registration. We are hoping the first step in doing registration and titling of a vehicle and then connect it to the owner and then using, let's say, the driver license issues by a DMV or the motor vehicle authority, and then be able to register DIDs onto the ITN, and then use Zootopia to onboard your SSDT and be able to communicate with others. And I can walk through an example later as an IoT example so far until we're not working directly with the person yet because the first thing we're doing is a B2B for our members only, and then they have to work with the end customers as well. So I can walk through that authentication as an IoT, and I think the person would be the same thing.
Daniel,
Yeah.
I get the feeling that the digital twin concept is not just limited to natural persons.
No, I think digital twin is everything but natural persons. If it's an IoT, a digital twin is, or of a vehicle, it's probably VIN based, right? A digital twin of a thing is usually serial number based or MAC address based or something like that. But the digital twin of a natural person is, I come from a biometrics background, is behavioral or biological characteristics. I don't know how those are digitally twinned unless you have literally a twin, which has a very similar but different DNA. Anyhow, that I could see an SSDT for everything but a natural person. I just don't buy it. But anyhow, that's just me.
So I see the SSDT as a file cabinet, and I can generate an SSDT, and then let's say I bring my vehicle to a maintenance shop. The maintenance shop switch out the battery for me, and the maintenance shop then would give me a verifiable credential that they sign and I sign that they switch out a battery for me that has a 3 years warranty. Then that is a verifiable credential that I can store in my SSDT for future reference, for example. So I don't see it as like a thing that can act on my own. I still control it, and I can use it to store verifiable credentials for anything from my driver license, to the maintenance of my vehicle, to my doctor appointments, to reservation for restaurants and
Yeah,
every
I
single.
don't want to dwell on this, but what you described was a wallet, not a digital twin.
But the digital twin, by definition, is a digital representation of an object or a system. So if you can do that collect data, statics of near real time, and then you can have it generate a verified.
No,
But
well,
that-
I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to dwell on this. A digital twin of a vehicle, let's say, is so that you want to do some modeling and simulation without the real vehicle. You create a digital twin of it with all the characteristics that you need for this simulation, let's say, or this
Correct.
training exercise. Right.
Correct. So that's the digital twin. We are now doing a self-solving digital twin. Again, this is the closest terminology that we could come to describing it, but it is a new concept, so it's hard to describe it in different ways. And I'm open to hear what you think also.
The fact that it is a wallet does not preclude it from becoming, I mean, a digital twin is too much said, but, you know, because it may not contain everything about the object that it's representing, meaning it's not a faithful digital copy of every characteristic of the physical object, including a natural person, which is sort of an impossible dream in a certain sense, because the physicality of the world precludes us from creating a true digital twin. But for the purposes of business interaction, there are certain characteristics that are more important than others. And those may be put into a wallet, and even the wallet could be, as Tram already put it, because it is a edge-based system, that could be the repository of a digital twin, a wallet. So there is nothing that says that a wallet cannot be used to implement a digital twin. But again, you know, the
Oh, go ahead.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead. I mean, my main point is that there is not going to be it is a digital twin in the sense that it is going to be a reduced but significant repository of certain characteristics, including a reflection of a real-time nature. Meaning if my net worth falls below a certain amount, then obviously that is going to be reflected in my financial profile, so that, you know, I cannot make certain types of transactions, or if my net worth goes above a certain amount. But that doesn't capture me as a person completely, obviously, and nor can it purport to capture even as prosaic an object as a car, because
I
the
agree.
car, yeah. So that's all we are saying.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of things you said. I even, you know, in life, we all have more than one side that we don't allow one person to see everything about us. So one person might see one side of you, and another person can see another side of you, and I think, you know, is we calling it this, but we have a very specific definition of what this is. Just like any paper, you have the glossary up front, and we describe what a self-solving digital twin is for what we're doing. And essentially, what you see here is there's Setopia and there's ITN. ITN is only for DITS registry, and then Setopia is where the self-solving digital twins reside and be able to issue verifiable credentials. And that, you know, you can have as many DIDs as you want. You can create DIDs to for your education, for your restaurant, for your doctor, for your bank, and all that can be stored as different VCs when you do transact with entities and store in your SSDT. And this is the definition that we have for SSDT in our ecosystem. So let me go back to that real quick. So we are technology agnostic, so therefore we don't endorse any particular blockchain. 10 years from now, we don't know which blockchain is going to be around. So I still have a floppy disk that has my thesis on it. So this is why. And then also the proof of concept from 15, 16, and 17 prove that blockchain works for what we're trying to do. So that's not the most exciting or important thing. What's important is, of course, how blockchain is being used. For Mobi Web3 infrastructure, you see the 3 layers here. The bottom layer is the blockchain protocols. We don't build that. We leave that to the experts to do. We are building the second layer, the integrated trust network. The only job that ITN has is to create and register DIDs onto blockchains. And right now we're using Fabric and Hyperledger. I'm sorry, Fabric and Ethereum. And then just think of the ITN like a phone book. So that is the public communication channel. It's been a while since any of us have seen a phone book. I can't tell how old everybody is, but I still remember the yellow pages and the white pages being printed and dropped at my front door. So once you decide to do business with a entity, you pick up the phone to call them, then you communicate in the private communication channel, Sitopia. And Sitopia use verifiable credentials and zero-knowledge proofs for data privacy, for example. I don't think I need to go into zero-knowledge proofs here, do I?
I don't think we can, because it probably takes a few days.
I'm not a technologist, so I can sum up what I know and give you an example of a pilot we did in a couple minutes, if you like. If not, I can skip it as well.
I believe you can skip it, but I'm not the only person on the call, so.
All right. So this is, let me give you, this is really busy, but essentially this slide is illustrating what we exactly are trying to do. Along with our members, we are building Sitopia and ITN, and our members run nodes for both ITN and Sitopia. The most important thing to remember about this is that the pre-existing web service layer, and this example here is for the motor vehicle authorities for registration and titling of a vehicle, but it should be the same for any use case, actually. So the existing web service layer and the legacy system layer remain the same. This is done on purpose for easy adoption. Each organization has their own way of doing things and how to handle business processes and what to do with data, customer PII and all that. So we don't go in and tell them how to change the process, what they need to do. But what we're doing is that we're creating Sitopia SSDT that everybody can use to communicate with each other using their web service layer. Some DMVs still use paper-based pink slip. So if they still insist on doing that, this, of course, is not going to be useful for them. But we are working with states to hopefully push e-registration and e-titling as an acceptable way of registering a vehicle. Any questions on that? So typically, we see both Sitopia or layer 3 and layer 2 being implemented by one organization. And we think that as having too much knowledge to put the pieces of the puzzle together. So we actually split that up into 2 different organizations. Mobi members in good standing have a little bit of each of the company, And of course, later on, maybe in a year or so, we'll open it up to outside funders as well. And then, of course, the VC arms of Mobi members as well. Because we can't do this based on membership dues alone. We've been doing that up until now. Mobi working groups, we have a few, as you can see, and we've been working on many different standards. They all involve DIDs and VCs, and we have done a few pilots. Recently, we completed last year a pilot with the EU Commission, and the EU Commission was interested in a vehicle self-verifying the carbon dioxide emission that's coming out of the vehicle and report it to the European state and of course the Commission as well. And then another pilot we just finished this year was for the dealer floor plan audit. The dealership, every dealership that you come across that has vehicles for sale, every single vehicle is financed by a finance company, could be a bank. And the finance company wants to know that the vehicles are still on the lot and has not been sold. There are a few bad apple, as always. There's some dealership that would sell the vehicle and they don't return the money to the bank right away as agreed upon. They sometimes keep the money to do other things with it. So because of that, a lot of the banks would send somebody physically, and what they do is counting cars. And that process is manual. It can't be done that often because somebody has to physically be on site. And it's not very, very trustworthy as well, because sometimes dealers can bring the vehicle back onto the lot and to be counted. And according to Accenture, if this process can be automated within the US alone, we can save up to $500 million a year if we don't do it manually. So what we did was that we had the self-sovereign digital twins of the bank, of the lenders, and they ping the vehicle and ask the vehicle, are you in this geofence location? And the vehicle and the geofence location is a pre-agreed upon as the dealership. And the vehicle would answer back saying yes or no, I am in the geofence or not. And if it's yes, fantastic. If it's no, it could possibly be driven around by a potential customer as a test drive. And location, as you know, is PII. So nobody wants to store that. Let's say the vehicle is being pinged every hour for 3 days straight. And at 3 a.m. on each day, which is when the vehicle should be on the lot at 3 a.m. And if the vehicle keeps saying, no, I'm not, then there probably is some problem and the lender needs to follow up with their own protocol as what to do next. But if the vehicle is around at night, then it's a safe bet that the vehicle is still on the lot and not been sold out of trust. So that was a pilot that we did recently. Any questions on that? So I can stop right here, or I can go through an example of how we do a verifiable credentials between an organization and a battery, for example, if you want.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
That sounds great.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is not meant for you to read. So ignore the small font. I'll walk through real quickly about right now. I don't know if you heard of the battery passport requirements yet. So government either make policy that are carrots or stick, right? And so in EU Commission have been talking about this for a few years now. They just signed a regulation recently that said by 2027, any company that bring a battery into the market for use, and it's not just for vehicle, it could be for your cell phone and your computer as well. If you bring the battery into circulation for being used, you have to provide a battery passport for that specific battery. Goes back to where the minerals was mined, was there child labor or not, how much recyclable material do you have there, and the requirements is by 2026. There are three things: cobalt and nickel and copper. There's certain percentage that have to be recycled by the manufacturer. So a lot of data has to be going into this battery passport. And if you don't have that, you are not allowed to sell the battery in Europe by 2027. That is a really big task and worrisome for many of the battery manufacturers, as you can see. And then in the US, there's another policy. If you buy a vehicle that was made in the US, an electric vehicle, then you get $7,500 incentive cash back. And right now, what auto manufacturers are doing is they have the engineers sign these verifiable credentials, physically signed to attest to the fact that the vehicle was made in the US. I don't see any problem with self-verification, do you? So joking aside, I don't think that solution is scalable. So within Mobi, we are working with our members to create a global battery passport system. And in it, of course, you have standards like the battery birth certificate. And birth certificate for a vehicle or a battery is pretty boring, just like yours or mine birth certificate. It has when were you born, how much you weigh, that kind of stuff, and who is your maker. Is along the way what happened to you, where you go to college, where you work. That's the interesting part. Same things for the vehicle, the battery. What happened along the way is more interesting. So let's see, you have a battery manufacturer and you have OEM here, stand for automakers 1, 2, and 3. They all have their own legacy system, and to communicate with each other, they all generate a SSDT to communicate. The battery manufacturer create a battery, then it send a message to its own SSDT asking a DIT to be created for the battery. Then the SSDT of the battery manufacturer send a message to Satopia asking a DIT to be created. Satopia then send a message to ITN. The ITN create a DIT, register it to the nodes, and then send the message back to Satopia, who then send the DIT to the battery manufacturer SSDT. That SSDT then directly send the DIT and deposit it into the battery SSDT. Next thing is the manufacturer then create a battery birth certificate because they create a battery. They need to do that and then change it to, of course, a standardized communication language using the ITN protocol. That becomes a verifiable credential for a battery birth certificate, then send it again to the battery to store it. Then come, let's say, an OEM, Ford. Ford wants to know, before installing a battery into its vehicle, they want to know if the battery is who it say it is, and it has records for the battery passport. It asks the battery to prove who it is. The battery then present the DIT and the battery birth certificate back to the automaker. The automaker, instead of trusting the battery, then send a message to Satopia to verify if this battery is who we say it is. Satopia then send a message to the ITN, ask for verification. ITN verifies it. Satopia send a message back to say it's safe, you can install the battery and go on your way. Let's say we're in a sharing economy, which, as you know, a few automakers are using similar battery as each other now. The next one comes along, wants to install the same battery in his vehicle, does the same verification as well, asking the battery to self-verify, and then that can be checked using Satopia and the ITN. So that's just an example of the birth certificate being verified. Any questions?
That was really interesting. So why specifically did electric vehicles make a good choice as an industry for Mobi to work with?
Well, Mobi is a smart mobility consortium, and many of our members are worried about having to have a battery passport, and they need to have a solution that is interoperable, not just for themselves, but for all the different hundreds of thousands of different suppliers that they have. And those suppliers also work with multiple automakers, not just one. So how do we make sure that they don't have to keep onboarding themselves onto centralized platform to communicate with each other? This is just a use case that we have to come up with a solution, because our members need to have battery passport by 2027. But this ecosystem, as you can tell, can be done for many use cases. Working groups need to sit down with a subject matter expert to nominate a use case, come up with what data is needed for each one of those use cases, and come up with standard schemas to be able to do everything in the verifiable credential.
Yeah,
ecosystem.
absolutely. And it sounds like is the regulation in Europe that's coming in 2027, but in the US, the incentive already exists
Yes.
for this battery passport. I see.
Yes, but it's right now is scalable because EVs are still being very a small percent of ICE vehicle, but by 2030, most automakers are vouching to make only EVs. That problem is going to be much more exacerbated, and
Right.
we need to have a solution. So, and many states too will have their own solution as well, that requirements for reporting, and how do you make sure that a vehicle, for example, one of our members operate fleets of vehicles, EVs. They purchase EVs and rent them out to many companies, and the companies that they cover 10 different states. And right now, the problem is that when they transport a vehicle from one state to another, the states don't talk to each other. And so the registration and titling is a mess for them. Yeah, how do you make sure that? And it's not just state to state. Within a state, you can have hundreds of different jurisdictions that doing things differently. And that
Right.
driver, yeah, that plate is going to look different too. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
But in terms of getting the, driving from state to state, doesn't the infrastructure exist already for that purpose, especially for larger vehicles like commercial trucks, and also for private cars that, you can drive. I can drive to LA without too much trouble. But I suspect what you're talking about is, I mean, I got a little bit of the battery, what do you call it, birth certificate and all that. But isn't there more to be done in terms of the source of materials, not just where it was manufactured, and which are obviously also impinges upon all manufactured goods, because they are usually sourced from multiple places, some of which have problems because of slave labor or, other kinds of sanctions.
Definitely. So yes, so the battery passport has to have a lot of that information, where the material was mined, no child labor was used, all that. So that needs to be verified by authority, and then the authority usually has vendors that they approve. So whoever make the battery needs to work with authorized vendors that can go in and assess. And then that has to be a verifiable credentials that enter into the system. So this is just one example of a verifiable credential. A battery along the whole lifetime can have hundreds, if not thousands, of verifiable credentials stored in this SSDT. As for vehicle, yes, you can drive from one country to another, from one state to another, but the registration of the vehicle is required by every government, that you need to register and pay a tax on it every year, registration fee. And then there's insurance as well. For example, within the US, you cannot register a vehicle unless you have proof of insurance. And right now you can buy insurance and pay a monthly fee, a monthly installment. And that is a huge problem in the US alone. There's $13 billion every year that's being going through people who buy insurance, pay for it for the first month, go to the state to prove that they have insurance, get their vehicle registered, and then stop paying insurance. And that problem is huge. Within the US alone, is $13 billion. So there's a lot of things that if you have verifiable credential and that you can track and be able to prove, many things can be much more efficient, and also fraud prevention as well.
Here in New York State, if you allow your insurance to lapse, the insurance providers usually communicate with the DMV, and they have very heavy penalties, including suspension of your own license.
Yes.
But that may not be the case in all states, we understand.
It is for all state. However, we have a partner that's an insurance consortium, did a test on this, and they found that within the state DMVs, a third, that's 33.3% of the VIN number that they have on files is wrong.
Well,
so yes, we have the laws and we have penalties, but the reporting in real time is really hard. And state have laws that if a lot of time, by the time they get the report, they're not sure if it's correct anymore. What if somebody else just move on to a different insurance company? There's no way for them to communicate in near real time to get near real time data. And that's the issues that states are having.
I guess we are running out of time. So I did have another question, which was to do with recovery. If everything is stored on the edge, and if you lose your edge device, how do you recover your credentials? I mean, this is a problem for anything that is confined purely to the edge.
Yes. So we will work with our members on some guidelines when it comes to key management. And then maybe some things are standardized and some things is going to be based on the companies. They need to, of course, have their own protocol on how to do keys management as well. So we're working on that. And then Citopia SSDT would have its own key management services probably. So entirely up to the business and then the end consumer on how they want to do that.
But it's not just the keys, it's also the credentials themselves.
Yes.
If they are stored only on some device that disappears.
No, if let's say the DMV issues me a driver license, then I have a credential and then the DMV does too. And the DMV will store that credential in their own SSDT that could be implemented in their cloud. It can be implemented anywhere they want. And then I can have a copy of the credential in my SSDT. So there's more than one copy.
So there is a centralized solution backing up this edge solution.
Well, but then that's the thing in this ecosystem is that we're not telling people to go do away with their centralized platform. They can continue to do that. It's just when they need to have credentials to communicate, and they don't even have to push any data out, right? They're just saying that Tram has a driver license. and then all the data within the driver license can be at the DMV.
I mean, we see this with natural persons. If I have 10 different, and I think this is where Vipin was going, if I have 10 different verifiable credentials from 10 different issuers, what Vipin's asking, I believe, is, well, if that goes away, if my wallet goes away, which you keep on, you continuously call an SSDT, I have to go back. Each of those 10 issuers might have what you're calling an SSDT. What I'm calling is their own wallets that have those verifiable credentials in it. I'd have to go back to all 10 to reestablish the 10 credentials that I had in my wallet. I think that's the question. And what you're saying makes sense, that the issuer preserves a copy of what they issued, but the individual, or the automobile in this case, is the only one that has an aggregate of all the VCs that it got for its battery, for its insurance, for its OEM status or whatever. But if the car wallet goes away, or SSDT as you call it, then how do you reestablish it? You have to go back to all the issuers that issued all those different credentials to that wallet.
Yes. I think every single use case need the expert to sit down and determine how these things are done. And I'm sure it's not going to be very different from how they are done now, except it will be done using digital and verifiable credentials. And so all these business processes need to be standardized and be able, and the front app, the UI needs to be built as well. So I can't answer for every single credentials, but in the ecosystem, the way we are thinking it through is everything has to have a data standard. How do you reissue a VC? How do you claim something? That needs to be done within the working group to work out the process.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, as we're talking here, my example with natural person, there, if there's some transaction audit that I could go back to and say, it doesn't have the PII of what credentials were issued, but the fact that I have these 10 or 12 or 17 VCs, so if my wallet ever went away, I could go back to that transaction audit on blockchain or some verifiable data registry, so I could rebuild my wallet and say, oh, I go back to these 17 issuers to get those, something like that. But yeah, as you said, it's some business process that has to be established.
Definitely, but the internet is only 30 years old, and look at how much we have done already.
No, the World Wide Web is, the internet was started in the 60s, like
yeah,
me.
69, yes.
Yeah.
First. So yes, the World Wide Web, 30 years old, and look at how much we've done so far with that. I have a feeling in 10 years, this will all be natural. Right now, it's exciting. We're working on it from the beginning.
Yep. I think that's why we're all here. We agree, or at least I do. Yeah.
Well, there has to be some kind of a user experience solution, which is relatively frictionless. Instead of spending 20 hours on the phone with 10 agencies, you may be able to do this with a push of a button after a certain cliff is, of verification is passed, like, for example, through one of your methods, Dan, the, a biometric, which everybody is afraid of, but looks like that was the only thing that was possible to be implemented at scale, for example, in India with the Aadhaar and other things. Of course, they have their problems, but you need some underlying infrastructure to be able to do all this.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I see we're a bit over time, but thank you so much, Tram, for joining us and giving a great presentation and great discussion.
Thank you all for having me. Have a
Yeah.
good rest of your.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining and giving working group updates as well. In 2 weeks, please join us for Drummond Reed's presentation on the trust banning protocol. So we look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks again, Trem, and thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.